Well, hello there. Welcome, everybody. I'm Sarah, and today we're here to talk about the middle tier of our Edelweiss Plus Analytics for libraries, which we affectionately call Basecamp. We have a bit of a mountain theme going on for our analytic products and our product names, even though we're in Michigan, actually, but we really like mountains. We're actually really excited to have you on the line because we have some new features and some new reporting to talk about. We hope you might enjoy them as well. Our presenters today, I'm actually not going to do the talking. Our presenters today are John Rubin, our CEO and founder, and Ruth Bradstreet, who's our product manager for our analytics products. So I'm going to pass it over for them. I'm going to keep an eye on chat and QA. So if you have any questions while they're talking, feel free to enter them there. If we aren't able to answer your question today, I'll personally follow up with you afterwards and make sure we track down that answer. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ruth and John. They're in the same office over there, so they'll probably both talk, but I think Ruth is going to start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yes, so like she said, it's the two of us, me and John, and what I'm going to talk a bit about the Basecamp features that are not the State of the Collection report, and then John's going to talk about the State of the Collection report. So with Basecamp, as Sarah mentioned, we've sort of introduced some new features. So with this tier, you get kind of a combination of things. So, and if you're kind of a bit of a data nerd like we are and get really excited about using data to make your job easier, well then, you know, we do too, because we've spent 16 years as a company exploring and working with these concepts. And the goal today is to kind of answer some common questions we get about Edelweiss Analytics for libraries, and specifically on this latest version, Basecamp, with the State of the Collection. So let me just go to the next slide here. So I'm imagining if you're on this, you probably are already familiar with Edelweiss Plus. We have a lot of librarians that use it in this kind of free version, and you may be using it to learn about new titles for selection or reader's advisory, or maybe you're there mostly for the digital review copies, which you can download and read at your leisure and review and so on through Edelweiss. But what we're talking about today is Edelweiss Analytics, which is an add-on for a fee module for libraries that aids in collection development. And just to give you a bit of background, we started about 15 years ago with a product for independent bookstores that helped them use data and workflow tools to manage their inventory better. And it's used now by the majority of independent retailers, independent bookstores, I should say. And then about 3 years ago, we released a similar product for libraries. That was designed more to help with collection development. And at this point, we're happy to have 3 separate tiers of Edelweiss Analytics to meet different needs of libraries of different sizes and budgets. So, and Sarah alluded to this, these are our cute names, Alpine, Basecamp, and Summit, which are mountain themed, the companies above the tree line. And as she said, we're in Michigan, so it's not that mountainous, but we can dream. But this kind of visually illustrates the 3 tiers, I suppose, the bottom, middle, top. So Alpine, to talk about each one a little bit, it's a user level version that gives you a view into the aggregate data, which is being able to just see what is selling well, what is circling well, sort of percentages of these 2 markets, retail and library, that has something on hand or has sold something or searched something in recent months. So it gives you information essentially that you can use to make more decisions, make smarter decisions about collection development, picking up new titles and so on. Basecamp has all of that, and in each case, each level has everything that the level below it does too, so bear that in mind. Basecamp, though, includes integration of your ILS data, which means we can do a whole lot more, and that means getting feeds from your ILS of circ history and current holdings and things like that. So we can show that to you in the application and use it for the stated collection of the collection report to include in benchmarking and to show you what's happening over time. The third one, Summit, we kind of call it gives you all the power to play and twiddle all the dials as much as you like and drill deeper. Using a fuller suite of analytics tools. You can use your own collection codes. It includes non-book, and we have some really cool tools. Well, we have a really cool tool for weeding, which I kind of think of as a weeding power tool in the Summit version. But today, we're here to talk about Basecamp, the middle one. And so what's it all about? So to start with, we'll integrate your ILS data, as I mentioned, into Edelweiss Plus, and that will really customize your experience there, and I'll talk about that in a sec. Secondly, it is about the State of the Collection report, which is a monthly or quarterly report that assesses your library's performance on 4 key measures of collection health, and across 45 genres and all of your branches if you have multiple branches. But I'm going to start by looking at how Basecamp customizes the Edelweiss experience for all of your library users, and then I'll turn it over to John for the next part. So first of all, this is the kind of integration. So generally speaking, it's the integration of ILS data is a way to show you what you do and don't already have, and that gives you options to sort by what you don't have and or do have, and to also see market data, as I mentioned before, which is the percentages sold, percentages circed across these peer groups. But before I talk too much more about that, I just wanted to mention, in case to back up just a little bit about Edelweiss. So meaning data integrated into Edelweiss is talking about Edelweiss Plus, which is really an industry standard at this point, resource which is used by many different parties in the book industry. And most American publishers are customers of ours, and they use Edelweiss to present their titles, to the world, or at least, to the book industry. And they put, because of that, they put most of their really detailed sort of insider content out there so that buyers, anyone from Barnes & Noble to a small library, and selectors can really be armed with as much information about a book as possible. And they also often post digital galleys or review copies to help you recommend titles to patrons and make buying decisions as well. And then we often hear from libraries that they have, the ones that use Edelweiss a lot, that they have the ILS open in one window and Edelweiss open in another. So this kind of brings those two things together. So hopefully that integrating the ILS data means that Edelweiss becomes all the more useful when researching books. And all of your library systems users, Edelweiss users, will be able to see this kind of thing that I'm showing in the screen, where there's a little check mark on the bottom right-hand corner of a cover. And that tells you that you have this. So if it's a green check mark, it tells you you have it in your holdings. If it's a yellow check mark like the one on the left, it tells you that you have it on order. So you don't have it right now. Maybe it's a new title you're bringing in. And of course, if there's no check mark, it means you don't have that. So it gives you a very quick, at a glance view of just yes or no. We have it, we don't have it kind of thing. So this could be, in a catalog that you're looking at, or selector might be looking at a catalog, reviewing some titles to purchase, or it could be in a search result. You could be looking at the titles on our Buzz page, which were reviewed by your colleagues or by your other fellow librarians, or looking at things that were reviewed by School Library Journal and Kirkus. So there's all kinds of different things in Edelweiss, if you're not familiar with the different ways of looking at lists of titles, things you can make yourself, things that are sort of generated by the group of people in Edelweiss, and you'd see that everywhere. So essentially, anywhere you see a cover, you'd see potentially see these check marks. And the other piece of this is a bit more detail on the same kind of thing. So on the right-hand side there, you will see that this particular branch that I have selected, I could be, if you have multiple branches, you can just select whichever one you want or select all, and it shows you there that they have 4, or they've searched for in the last X months. There's a setting you can set to say how many months back do you want to talk about for circulation. So say it's the last 3 months, they've searched 4 times, I should say, and they have 3 in their holdings. That's the number in the middle. So they have 3 copies that have searched 4 times in the last 3 months. So you get very detailed information about specifically what's where when you're looking at this. So that can give you a pretty good idea of whether or not you have something that other people don't have. It can kind of the comparison of that to the detail on the left is kind of interesting too. So on the left, what you have here is, again, this market or peer data I mentioned a couple times. So right now, that little thing that looks like a house in the left corner, that's supposed to be a bookstore. So it's telling me I'm looking at bookstore sales as opposed to library circs. But across all of the bookstores in our group, about 450 odd independent bookstores, 39% of them have sold this as a Belly book in the last 3 months. And right now, 62% of them have it on hand at their stores, and 4% of them have it on order. So that gives you that retail information that can be really valuable. This is a relatively new book. If you find that you see at a glance in here when you're looking through Edelweiss that maybe either you don't have it at all, or that possibly your circ is really high for the number of copies you're holding, and you can make an adjustment right there by putting this on a list or mentally noting that for later. Or you might see the opposite. You might see that for whatever reason you seem to circ this book particularly well and it doesn't sell in bookstores. Or if you switch over from the little bookshop indicator to the library indicator, you'd see circulation. So you could say, well, this book seems to circ really well at all the other libraries, or the libraries in that group, but we don't seem to circ it. So that could be an indication that maybe it's a regional title and you wouldn't expect it to, but it might be something that you could move to a different part of the collection or a different part of the library if it does seem to have legs, but for whatever reason your patrons are not seeing it or something like that. And the other thing you can do with this too, when you're in this view, this is the, I should sort of name it, that green bar across the top. We call that the analytics bar, and it will appear in everything. And if you want to switch it off, you can switch it off. But once you switch it on, you can see it on every single book, just like the check marks. And then, because that exists there, you can also go up to the top of the page in Edelweiss and sort by that too. So you can say, I want to sort by the books that have sold best, or the books that have circed best on this list of books I'm looking at. And that could be any old list. It could be a catalog, it could be a list you've made, it could be a search result. And just a bit more detail about these numbers with the peer. I think they're really helpful for selection, like I said, not only in helping you choose which titles to buy, also which ones maybe not to buy. So if you see that, if you're considering something and then you realize that really nobody else is circling it or really doesn't own it, that might factor into your decision. And of course, you can see what's popular, and you can switch between libraries and bookstores. And the idea is to sort of help you anticipate patron demand by seeing these numbers as you go. And then, of course, you're seeing how your holdings compare. For titles that are pre-publication, that middle circle, this is somewhere where you can get kind of a jump in the new releases. And I think if you switch in this mode to looking at, instead of library data, looking at retail data, it's really interesting because booksellers really live or die based on their sales, and especially for new titles. And if they underbuy or skip a title that turns out to sell well, it's literally kind of lost money for them. So they're really good, I think, at identifying what's going to be big. They have very close relationships with the publishers and know what's going on with the marketing for books. So if you're looking for pre-publication books and want to know really, get a really good bead on what's happening out there in the market and what demand is likely to be, then using this on order quantity or percentage. You'll see that book in the middle. It says on order in 43% of the bookstores. It's a pre-pub book, so it doesn't show any on hands or any sales yet, but the on order is kind of the key when you're looking at pre-pub, of course. The next thing, the other place, I should say, really where we baked in your ILS data is in comparable titles. Now, I don't know how many of you use this concept, but this is the idea that when you're purchasing a new title or selecting something new and deciding on how many to buy, you have some history there from comparable titles from the, other versions of the book, or typically other books by the same author, other books on the same topic. And the cool thing about this is, so publishers already do this. The publishers pick a selection of titles to put into Edelweiss specifically to show to everybody, we think these are the comp titles. So they will pick, like I said, things of similar topics, same author. But what's neat is that you'd be able to see your circulation history for those specific titles all together in one grid. This is something that we've had on the retail side for a long time, and it's been really key to some of our success with Edelweiss, actually, because, and I'm sure it's the same for libraries, like retailers would sit there and talk to a rep or be looking at a book and sort of turn around and look at their point of sale system and find out how well they'd sold these comparable titles, but have to look up 3 or 4 or 5 different titles one at a time and sort of collate that data in their head. Whereas this shows you directly things like your lifetime circ of a comparable title, your last time you circed it, how many you have right now in holdings, and last year's circulations. So, and you can look at that, the little grid there shows you across all of the branches. I know that's really tiny, but that's what that's trying to show you. So not only in aggregate, but also across each branch. And you can also, if you don't think those are the right comp titles and you want to see something else, you can just do a search, find some other comp titles, add them to the list, and it will sort of automatically pull in your circ history there as well. So that's completely new recently for librarians and for people that use Basecamp or Summit for purchasing. Last thing to mention here is that you can create any lists, sort of an actionable thing from all of these things I've been talking about where you can see data baked into Edelweiss, is that you can then put things on lists. So you can make a list by tagging things, or you can make lists that we actually call collections, but they're similar to a catalog, out of anything. So a search result, a list of ISBNs that you have handy, and then you could do all kinds of things from there too. So you can see in the slide that it's showing that I'm sorting by checked out percentage. So I could take a list of books, sort them by the most checked out at other libraries, and then sort of assume that the top ones are the ones that you might be most interested in purchasing or reviewing the state of them in your own collection. And then you can go on to the next step if you want to, and actually put order quantities in there if you want. If there's anybody using Edelweiss can do that. Just put a number in there on the right, and then those orders are exportable. So you can take a list of titles, essentially add quantities if you want or not, export them to something that you can send straight to iPage for Ingram or to Baker and Taylor's title source, and place orders fairly directly that way. So those are the places you'll see it. It's a common idea of just showing you percentages of stocked, sales, checked out, and so on across the market, but also revealing your own ILS data for you to sort of see it in there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who is going to talk about the state of the collection report.
Great. Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so we're going to change gears a little bit, and I often kind of say that Basecamp has 2 components to it. One is almost turbocharging your Edelweiss usage, so it's really expanding the amount of information that you can see about individual titles and bringing your ILS data into that, which is what Ruth just reviewed. And then the second component is what we call the state of the collection report, which is more of a top-down analysis of your library and your library branches. It's a periodic report that, depending on your preference, you can receive either monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually, and the price varies according to that as well. And there's a bit of a methodology that we follow to analyze your collection, and we really do that for a couple of reasons. One is just that we think that these are the measures that are indicators of a healthy collection. But 2, one of the goals with the State of the Collection report was to really make it as easily understandable as possible and minimize the learning curve. So it doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of our Summit service, which we have another webinar for that. And that's really where you can go in and really kind of adjust all the levers and knobs and all that kind of stuff. The State of the Collection report will present things to you in more of a story kind of way. So our basic philosophy, especially on our analytics, is summed up pretty well, I think, by this quote, which is, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And so that's great, makes a lot of sense. You could have an argument as to how much you need quantitative measures versus qualitative measures, but even if something is qualitative, you're still measuring it and acting on it. But the beauty of your ILS system is that it has a ton of information that you can use to make better decisions. It's just getting the information out and maybe even more importantly, figuring out or determining what the actual measures are. And our philosophy is really all around picking measures that are actionable. So something like circulation, total circulation, that is a measure, and it's a measure you can use to assess your library, but it's not terribly actionable. So if your circulation is going up or down, great. We want to keep it going up, but what do you do with that? So what we've tried to do, and what these 4 measures each have is have actions associated with them that you can do something. So these 4 measures: freshness, relevance, hit rate, and turnover. I'll go through these. I think just to understand the concepts is important, but we won't go too deep in them. But we really look at, if you manage to these 4 things: keeping the collection fresh, keeping it relevant, improving your hit rate on new titles coming in, and manage turnover, which I'll talk to, then in all likelihood you will have a healthy collection. That's our hypothesis. So freshness, the first one on the left, what portion of your collection has been active? So what this really is we look at different genres in the library and apply this measure to it, which is what percentage of that given collection within your collection has had any activity. So we look at things like last circ date, last receive date, and use a threshold in the state of the collection report of 2 years. And again, this is another feature where in the Summit service you can adjust that number. We found that 2 years is a pretty good indicator across libraries. And the neat thing in this report is, if you see this little pie chart over here on the left, you can see what portion of the titles haven't moved or haven't had any activity, and you can actually click and get right into those titles and sort by your call numbers, and weeding might be your typical action from freshness, but it also could be sort of strategically shifting collections around within the library, that type of thing. Relevance can mean a lot of different things, but in this context it references what Ruth talked about when she was mentioning the other aspect of Basecamp, which is that we bring in daily sales data from about 450 independent bookstores across the country. And what we mean by relevance here is what percentage of what's selling in the marketplace actively now do you own? So again, there are other measures. This doesn't take into account local, which is obviously important, but this has sort of, the idea behind this is don't miss the easy ones, or even sort of slightly harder, because this isn't just the New York Times bestseller list, but it looks at anything that's been selling in over 10% of the retail stores. And then the graphic and clickable dimension within the report that goes along with it is, you can see, show me the ones that are selling in over 50% of the stores, 13 in this case that I don't own, between 20 and 50%, and between 10 and 20%. So you can go pretty deep down where you're not just getting the top sellers, but you're also getting kind of mid-list that's moving. Hit rate is a measure of new title performance. So of the titles that you bought that have been published in the last year, how have they done? And this little red measure over here is the one you want to minimize, which is we playfully call DOA, dead on arrival, that haven't circulated at all. And again, you can click through to those and see those in the report. And then lastly, turnover. I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but it's a retail measure, but we think that it works pretty well in the library space as well, in our experience. And it's essentially how much inventory or how much collection do you need to generate the circulation that you have. So it's a measure of efficiency, essentially. And then you get a few other stats in here, like relative use and what percentage of holdings, that type of thing. So these are the measures. When and I should even back up, when you send us your data through the ILS, if you sign up, we automatically calculate all of these measures by genre. So the other key aspect of the State of the Collection report is that we take your ISBNs that you send us and we put them into industry standard genres. And so this is just a little snippet here you're seeing here of nonfiction, but there are, as I'll show you, a good number of fiction sections, a good number of kids and YA sections. But here we're looking at art and architecture, biography, memoir, etc. So each of those measures that we looked at on the previous page are analyzed per genre. So you can sort of see within there, within each genre, how they perform on those four measures. And a couple benefits to doing it this way, because we also bring in your call numbers and your collection codes, and you can look at the information that way. But looking at the genres allows us to do two things. One is we can compare to your peers. So we can, in this little chart here is the best way I think to show it, the gray dot is the average performance for all the public libraries that send us information, that subscribe to the service, and the colored dot is where you are on this measure. So this is all just for you, but it's to help you identify areas of opportunity. So in the case, you can see the little key here where it's red or orange. If we're to the left of the average, it means that our performance is either moderately below or significantly below the average. And if it's above, it's moderately above or significantly above. So we can gauge our performance versus the average of the public libraries rather than comparing something like art and architecture to comics and graphic novels. So if you compare art and architecture or design and photography to comics and graphic novels, it will always show up as it's not performing as well as those sections, because those are comics and graphic novels, or pick your sort of fast-moving, popular sections will in general have higher performance on these. So the idea is compare yourself to how peers perform in these different genres. So hopefully that makes sense. That's where the little don't measure apples to oranges. So these concepts are the main ones behind the State of the Collection report. Other quick concepts, and then I'll jump in and actually show that to you, are you can compare over time. So the idea behind this sort of benchmark and looking at your performance is that you can go in and say, let me look at art and architecture, identify that as a genre that I want to focus on, maybe go in and look at the stale titles, maybe go in and look at what I don't own that's selling, and then the next month, the next quarter, the next half year, gauge your performance on that. So it gives you some concrete goals as opposed to just going in and sort of improving your collection in a vague way. Obviously benchmarked against the peer libraries, we look at these genres. You can compare your branches if you have multiple branches. And again, I mentioned that when you click on some of these charts within the State of the Collection report, you can actually get to the title level. So Ruth, how do I do the control?
Oh, just escape.
Escape.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, if I can just find my cursor here. There it is. So this is an example of the State of the Collection report. It is a website where once you get the data flowing to us, which we can talk about, which we'll talk about a bit at the end of this in terms of, from your Horizon or Symphony or TLC or Evergreen or Sierra system, whatever it is, you feed that data in, you get an email that says your July 2018 report is ready, and you can come in and you can see this. And it operates a bit like a website and a bit like a report, where I can just kind of page through the report. I can also go in and jump at any point to a particular page in my report. And even though this is 66 pages, it really is sort of 4 or 5 main types of pages you need to learn to read, if you want to think about it that way. Most of them being detail on a particular genre. So I could always just come right in here and say, I just want to look at my juvenile fantasy magic section. And you'll see here a bit about it. You'll see that there are 2764 titles, which represents 1.63% of this library's collection. Here we have our measures, where they have 78% of this section fresh, which means that there are 589 stale titles, according to how stale. And this is where I can quickly jump right in here, and it will give me a list of what these titles actually are. So here are my 110 stale titles, along with a measure of why they're there, how many days they've been on the shelf, my call number, things like how they're doing in the market, that type of thing. So export that to Excel, go out to the stacks. Same kind of thing with the what's selling in the marketplace that I don't have. So I can look at these different ones and I can sort of say, do I want to bring these titles in? Interesting one there. Quickly get a sense of this, or I could make a decision. We had one library that looked at this kind of information and said, that makes sense because, we know that that's in a back room and we've been meaning to move that out, et cetera. I can also come in and I can look, for example, across my branches and say, are there any particular branches that are doing better than others? Maybe I want to rebalance a little bit in this. Maybe I just want to identify where to focus. So I can look at it in this way, but there also are some more kind of top-down pages. So you do get a relative score, which essentially is based on how many of the genres within these different metrics are below average, above average, that type of thing. And then I can see how did I perform versus last time. This sort of usage gets a little bit more at something that you may want to use to present to a board to show them, here's how we've been doing. We've improved in this area. This is driving our action plans. So I can actually click in here, report, or just a custom page range if I want to print this out and give it to my YA selector, that type of thing. I can also go here to sort of toggle from branch to branch. A couple other top-down approaches, really if I'm thinking more, help me identify where I should be focusing on. We summarize kind of a top 15 strengths, and then being kind of softer than saying these are problems, saying that they're opportunities. So here are the top 15 opportunities, which are the genres that show up lower than the peer average the most. So if I click into something like classics, I'll see mainly greens and yellows. If I click into something like romance, which shows up here, I'll see more oranges, which indicates opportunity. So I can drill, so I can use this as a way to sort of help me prioritize and choose what I want to work on when. But I can also come in and look at something like this, which shows me across the genres, where do these all fall in terms of moderately above, moderately below the average, et cetera. So this is a good example where I have some of these sections, my YA sections, where I tend to be sort of above average on my hit rate, and a few sections where I might want to go in and look and see what's happening within gardening and drill deeper within there. And that's really kind of the state of the collection report. A few other pages, but as you can see, the majority of it is kind of letting you go in and see within these genres what's happening. Okay, I'm gonna click back over here and just show you a few more things, and then a couple examples actually that we have from some of our libraries. So what you can learn about your collections, I'll run through this fairly quickly. We presented this at a few conferences at Book Expo, but these are just kind of examples of the things that we've seen from this State of the Collection report. So the first one is our anonymous library A, and it just kind of points out how each of these genres kind of does have their own characteristics and why it makes sense to break your collection out in this way. And this is a real library where the colored dots are this library's performance overlaid with the gray dots, which are the peers. And just what's kind of neat is how true to form in general this is, where, you know, even though the library is a little bit above or a little bit below, really hug pretty closely to the common dynamics across libraries for how these genres work. So again, the idea is optimize your collection based on the dynamics of that collection rather than comparing something like a literary collections to a comics and graphic novels. It's also just kind of fascinating. You can compare what percentage that genre represents for your collection versus the peer average, and we've just found, again, for most of our public libraries, it's very common. So or they're very similar, and we don't find a lot of variation. Couple other findings, and we've seen this, you know, again, you can imagine we see a different thing with every library that comes on board, but you can definitely see dynamics at a higher level than within these genres, and this is an example of it. So if you recall, the genres here on the left are adult nonfiction, the genres up on the top right are adult fiction, and the genres on the bottom right are kids and youth. And for this library, which is a real library, you do see a pattern where consistently the youth sections are performing a little bit worse than the peer average. So why that is, we have no idea. That's where you would come in, you know your library, and you know whether this is a dynamic that makes sense and just is, it's the nature of your market, or maybe it's something new to you and it indicates, hey, we need to go in and really look at what's going on with our youth sections. Is it, you know, do we need to, again, move shelves around, or do we need to look at how we do selection and weeding? We've talked a couple times, Ruth mentioned it, I mentioned it about the retail top sellers, and we do find some cases where you can actually see that the impact of having a greater percentage of the top sellers in the marketplace, again, a measure of what the market is interested in with that turnover or efficiency rating. So here's an example from a library where in the youth and adult nonfiction, most of the categories or genres show up right at the average in terms of the percentage of those titles that are selling in the marketplace, and their turnover is right in the average. But in adult fiction, they're above average. So they are stocking or owning more than the average in these different genres of what's selling, and their turnover reflects that. So not saying that that's always the case, but we can see that kind of things and that kind of thing in the data as well. And then this is just sort of a demonstration or a graphic of what I showed you before of how you would use the State of the Collection report if you wanted to come out and say, I want to freshen up a section and look at these 280 stale titles and look at weeding or moving those out and bring in the 45, or actually there are 95 here or 3 here, titles that are moving in the marketplace. So I've got stuff on the shelves that isn't moving, isn't in demand. There's stuff out there that anecdotally from the marketplace is, and obviously budget constraints and acquisition budgets come in place here, but if and when you have the money to spend, these are sort of the areas that you want to focus on. So, am I wrapping this up? I'll wrap this up. So, should mention that we have a free trial, especially for we work especially well with these ILS systems. So Evergreen, TLC, Triple I, which is Polaris and Sierra, and the Circe Dynex, Symphony, and Horizon ILS systems there. Our goal in this, and so I mentioned we work particularly well, we work with other ILS systems. Some of them that aren't on this list, you just have to do a little bit more. And our goal for this is to make it ultimately a turnkey solution where you sign up and you don't need to worry about the data transfer. And it's pretty much that way for Evergreen, TLC, and the Circe Dynex systems for sure. And we're working on the other one. So, and just in case, so Circe is Symphony and Horizon, TLC is Library Solutions and Carlex.
All right.
So that's our presentation on Basecamp. If you have any questions, Ruth, do you want to?
Yeah, if you have questions, feel free to email us anytime at support@abovethetreeline.com or go through our website at abovethetreeline.com. Also, this will be recorded, so if you have colleagues who missed it, we'll be sending out the links to that. So thanks very much for attending and talk to you soon. Bye.